And good morning, everybody. It's Monday, Law and Legitimacy. We're back after a weekend that was not long enough and too good. You know, if you want to get an intimation of infinity, have a good weekend because, you just don't want to give it up. And you're thinking, why can't life be like this all the time? Why can't I be mellow, unstressed, happy to see my wife, patient with my infinitely demanding border collie, and otherwise in love with the world? Well, there's a reason for that. I had no responsibilities. So you're looking at the banner down there. Follow @LawPod Daily on exclamation point. Every time I see that, I'm thinking, did we go Chinese, Mike? Are we on a G?
Z.
On G, we bring you all the good news from China, where everyone at 8 a.m. is going to touch their toes and say, life is good, life is good. In the West, you will learn. But Dawn McNeil, I see you online here, and we are sad to hear about this report that you had been swatted. We're glad you're fine. We talked last week about the death of the fellow, Mr. Robertson, in Provo, Utah, and then come to find out that a SWAT team approached Dawn's house looking for some on a report that someone had been abducted and whatnot. A colleague of mine in Connecticut, a lawyer, was recently swatted. Her husband, who is a SWAT team law enforcement officer, had to leave the house begging officers not to shoot their dog. They have a pretty good idea who the malicious actor was, who set them up for that. It's not a sport. We're glad you're okay, Dawn. As we learned in Provo, things can go horribly wrong when the police come approaching your house with guns drawn looking for trouble. Lo and behold, they have a tendency to find it. I'm not sure where to begin this morning. I guess we can begin light. The Bleacher Report's out with its report of the top 25 NCAA football teams. They're expecting a three-peat for the Georgia Dogs. Hard to argue with that, other than statistically it's unlikely. But of course, we noted number 2, the Michigan Wolverines, and Jim Harbaugh, and Jim Harbaugh's saga. We talked before that Harbaugh was a target of NCAA sanctions. He and the University of Michigan tried to negotiate their way around the problem, which is apparently the NCAA's preferred course. There was talk that he'd sit out the first 4 games, but those talks have concluded, and now they'll likely go to a full hearing. That hearing will be postponed, insiders say, until sometime after the 2023 season ends, meaning that Harbaugh will be at the helm of the Wolverines for their entire season this year. But will he be at the helm beyond? Rumor is, and reports are, that he has not concluded a contract for the 2024 year. The NFL is still sniffing around, and it may be that Harbaugh figures he'll give it one last shot at a national championship, let the NCAA pound sand, and maybe balk or walk on the hearings that they've set for him in 2024. Stay tuned, but in the meantime, go blue. That's all I needed to say this morning. Go blue. We're 3 weeks out.
We can't just gloss over it like that. I mean, this is something we covered a few weeks ago on the stream, and it was in response to alleged recruiting violations that occurred primarily during that COVID period. And so all of these allegations stem back from a couple of years ago. And what's interesting here is that I think you shared with me that in Ann Arbor are fairly bullish on the Michigan football team's prospects of a championship this year. So this may be driving a lot of it. I think that, college coaches with a brand such as Jim Harbaugh always have a way to the NFL if they want it. I think that that's every major college football program's greatest fear, is that, the programs are pumped up. They've got, very lucrative contracts for their coaches, and then they leave. Of course, Jim's brother, John, is the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. So it's not as if there isn't a narrative there that the NFL couldn't lean heavily into. So if there are underlying facts, because as we see here, the NCAA's Committee on Infractions rejected what we all believed was a negotiated suspension agreement between Harbaugh and the NCAA, right? And what they've done in that negotiated suspension was that he would sit out the first 4 games of the season. Then we were joking about how inconsequential those games were when you look at the schedule. So it wasn't really much of a suspension at all. If anything, just some dry reps for the coaching staff that sits underneath him and largely does all of his preparation and game plans and that kind of stuff at this point in his career anyway. But it's really interesting that the committee for the NCAA has suggested that they are obligated to do what is in the best interests of the organization. And for whatever reason, that means that the pre-negotiated deal with Harbaugh being 4 games is not in the best interests of the NCAA. And it just leads me to ask this simple question, Norm. What the hell are the interests of the NCAA in 2023? It doesn't seem like it's a very self-aware organization, and it seems like they are misapplying whatever shred of credibility they have left to target Harbaugh and recruiting violations that the average college football fan knows is part of the game. You chalk these things up to the game.
Well, let's keep an eye on the NCAA. Each week they give us new reason to hope for its dissolution. So rather than realign the conferences, maybe we should just disband the NCAA. So
I agree, for the record. I agree. You're not going to get any flack from me about that.
If the 2024 election becomes a prelude to widespread civil unrest, and something like dissolution and approaches a civil war, historians will look back at the law review article that we have on the screen by William Bowd and Michael Stokes, called The Sweep and Force of Section 3. This is an article that is set to be published in print in 2024, but was placed on the SSRN Social Service Research Network online and then hawked to major media. It has been the subject of editorials in major New York and news stories in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and elsewhere. It's 126 pages long, and not all of you will take the time to read it all carefully. I have, and it's a powerful piece of work. And here's the bottom line, the takeaway. Under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, anyone who has previously sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and then engaged either in insurrection, rebellion, or aiding in or comforting those who engage in insurrection or rebellion is disqualified from serving in for federal office in the future, unless Congress votes by a 2/3 majority in both houses to give that person amnesty. How does that apply, you say? Bowd and Stokes take a bold tack. They say that that it's it's a sweeping prohibition, and it is self-enforcing. In other words, there is not a need to be convicted of insurrection or rebellion or solicitation or conspiracy. That if a person has, in the judgment of other constitutional officers, violated the law, violated this section of the Constitution, then they are obligated to act in whatever form and whatever capacity their office and or role requires. Thus, a person in a Secretary of State's office being asked to register a person or put a person on a list of candidates could refuse to do so because the person in the Secretary of State's judgment has engaged in prohibited conduct under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And it would be incumbent on the candidate himself at that point to challenge the Secretary of State's determination in court. And let me repeat this in a slightly different way, because I want you to appreciate just how significant this provision is. Basically, what they say is that unlike the treason clause in the Constitution, which contemplates a trial, the 14th Amendment's Section 3 provision is self-enforcing. And thus, at the moment that an individual engages in prohibited conduct, that individual is disqualified from office. And it is in the judgment of other constitutional officers administering access to the polls, administering elections, fellow elected officials sitting with other congressmen, let's say, it is up to them to take steps to obey their constitutional obligation to enforce the disqualification by refusing a person access to the polls, by refusing them campaign financing, by refusing them access to a ballot, by removing them from office if they are in office. And so under this interpretation, of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment as we approach the 2024 election with or without a verdict in any of the cases against Trump relating to January 6th. Right now, there's only one. We expect by week's end or shortly thereafter, there'll be a separate in the state of Georgia. Even without verdicts in those cases, Bowd and Smith argue, Stokes argue, public officials who themselves have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution have an independent duty to act immediately, to take steps to deprive Trump from the polling place. They say, and they go on to argue, and they argue this without blinking, that as to those who would talk about this, something like the counter-majoritarian difficulty, aka what happens if people want to vote for him? What happens if a majority vote for him? They would say, well, that's too bad, because we, the people, in the Constitution and enacting the Fourth Amendment, put in a broad disqualification clause that renders that person unfit to serve, regardless of the current polling place. And so, the teaser to this segment of the show this morning was, if things really go to hell in a handbasket in the United States in the 2024 election because of disputes about Donald Trump, it may well be that those disputes will center around the fact that people will feel disenfranchised because, in reliance on the Bowd and Stokes article, public officials refuse to place a man that people want on the ballot, thus requiring him, meaning Trump, to go to court to compel state officials to place him on the ballot. Wow. Reading that, contemplating that is sort of breathtaking. I think they make a good argument in this very comprehensive piece. They take a look at the meaning of insurrection. They take a look at the meaning of rebellion, and they note that while insurrection at its root means using force against the authority of the government, it does not necessarily rise to the level of a rebellion. A rebellion is a rejection of the constituted authorities rather than a forceful reaction to their particular act. And a rebellion is to replace them with another form of government or other means of governing. While not every insurrection is necessarily a rebellion, all rebellions contain insurrectionary activities, and the line between the two blurs, and they have a chilling reference in there to the fact that that some rebellions percolate from below, from a broad and widespread sense of disenchantment with government and the manner and norms by which people are governed. And for the life of me, as I read Bowd and Stokes, I began to wonder, are we there at this point? And will efforts on behalf of state officials and appointed officials elsewhere to keep Trump off the ballot, will that make a bad problem worse? And will it push us in the direction of something like outright rebellion or at a minimum, an inability to be governed? So I recommend that all of you read the article. It really is, it's not a partisan piece. At least not ostensibly a partisan piece.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to have a hard time, Norm, convincing most people that this is not a partisan piece. I've attempted to put the hyperlink into the YouTube chat here, but I know I've posted it in the Rumble chat so that, because we've had a few people ask where we can find the article. I did, in response to when we covered this last week on X, our live stream broadcast, in the reply, I posted this article there as well. So if you have not had an opportunity to take a peek, I'll just continue. I'll do it as a reply to this post as well today. My question for you on this, Norm, if we can spend a couple more minutes here.
Yeah.
I think obviously the notion of some sort of or insurrection, it feels very subjective at this point in time. Just depending, it's very outcome determinative, I guess I would say, depending on what side of the political aisle one is on and what candidate or what outcome one wants to see happen. What domino would fall? What type of domino would fall first for us to be watching this begin to unfold? And the second part to that question is, why is it taking so long for that domino to indeed fall? Because from where I'm sitting, he's already announced his candidacy. He's already got one lawsuit that would implicate what the thrust of this law review article, and another anticipated. Why is it that this has not been pursued, and is this something that Trump supporters would do well to begin to, I guess, acclimate themselves to, because it seems to be forthcoming? So first question, what domino would fall first? What type of domino would fall first? I don't want to say which state, but like which domino would fall first? How would that happen? And then why has that domino not already fallen?
So, it's premature for it to have fallen thus far. Nothing in the world prevents any person in the United States from declaring their candidacy. If you get enough, if you want to go on your local radio station today, Mike, and say you're running for president, fine. And you'll generate some juice or not. The rubber meets the road, however, when it comes time to voting, when it comes time to getting qualifications that are publicly recognized by state actors, requiring them to take some affirmative act to put your name on a ballot or to otherwise provide you with public financing. So focus on the state action requirement. In order to become president, you must be elected. In order to be elected, you have to satisfy the requirements of various state election laws, and they have to make determinations about whether you're qualified or eligible to be on the ballot. Some of those are governed by party rules. Have you gotten the nomination? Have you gotten enough signatures? Have they verified that you've gotten enough signatures to get on a ballot? A member of a Secretary of State office or a state election official looking at a Trump document can simply refuse to consider it by saying, under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, in my judgment, he's disqualified. And I've taken an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to enforce the law. And by my reading of the law, he cannot be a candidate. At that point, Trump would say, but here, I've satisfied the requirement. I've got the number of votes. I've got the party nomination. And the official would say, yes, you do, but you're disqualified because you don't have the congressional vote of 2/3 of both houses to have an amnesty. Then the burden would shift to Trump to go to court on a motion for injunctive relief and a declaratory judgment, basically to say he is eligible, he's over the age of 35, and he's required, he's satisfied the ballot requirements, whatever they are in a given state, and therefore his name should be put on. This article it doesn't say do this, but that's the logical implication of that. And therefore, the first domino to fall would be whatever steps it is necessary for Mr. Trump or any presidential candidate, but we're focusing on Trump, to fulfill in a given state to get on the ballot. Expect state actors to deny him access to the ballot on the grounds that the 14th Amendment Section 3 automatically disqualifies him. And as Bowden and Stokes say, then he's got access to the courts to vindicate his claim that in fact he is. And they use an analogy. The Constitution has certain self-enforcing rules about qualifications. One is that a candidate has to be 35. So you appear, Mike, at the robust age of 33 with all the signatures of every person in your state saying, we want Mike. And the person at the thing is going to say, what's your birth date? You're going to tell them the birth date, and they're going to say, no, you're not 35. You can't be on the ballot.
The robust age of 30. Robust.
Yeah. Well, you certainly are. If I had your brains at 33, I'd have been retired at 50, and I wouldn't be talking online this morning. But so that's where you got to look. I say resist the implication to assume it's a partisan piece. The scholarship is solid. I read all the footnotes. I'm sitting there pulling extra law review articles that they've referred me to, and it's a very, very powerful argument. A Constitution, they argue that the 14th Amendment was the Reconstruction refounding. Eric Foner's got a wonderful book on that topic. And that when we, the people, spoke in this refounding of the Constitution in the 14th Amendment, we concluded that a public official who then turned on the very public he swore to serve in upholding its Constitution loses the right to serve again. And that wasn't a right that was confined simply to the Civil War era. It's a right like all the guarantees of the Bill of Rights and the various amendments that extends indefinitely into the future. So the first flashpoint is that. That'll be the first domino to fall. And reading this article, I could imagine a world in which Trump had significant support in a state. He'd satisfied all the nominal requirements for office. He'd gotten a certain number of votes. He had signatures. He'd gotten a party endorsement, whatever it was. And then a Secretary of State will say, yes, but you engaged in insurrection or providing aid and comfort, in my judgment, to others who engaged in insurrection, and therefore you're ineligible. And then Trump would have to run to the court to vindicate his eligibility. So stay tuned. I hope I'm wrong.
So what you just said, what you just said is why I asked the question about why it's taking so long, or when this becomes ripe, in other words. And that's because I do sense that their window within which the first domino in this Section 3 argument would need to fall, like one Secretary of State in one state would need to make the decision to remove his name from the ballot. And at that point, Trump would need to have the swift hand to get to a court in order to reverse that. I'm just not confident that, as we've seen leading up to this, that adjudication through the courts is an adequate remedy for this lawfare as it would play out. That's my fear about it.
Yeah, no, yeah. And of course, the response would be, well, that's the way it is. That's the way the world works. You swear in a state actor, an official, to enforce the law. And sometimes the law speaks in terms, very simply, in terms of simple duties. Sometimes it speaks grandly. Sometimes it challenges you to engage in sweeping activity that may be unpopular. And this is one of those occasions, they say. Now, against the hypothesis that this was not a partisan piece, you can ask yourself why the rush to print in the summer of 2023. Why not wait until it's published in the University of Pennsylvania Law Review in 2024? Because it'll be too late then. I mean, they got this out there as a publicity campaign to make everybody, including us, aware of the article well before the registration season for the 2024 primaries and whatnot begins. And so now the pump is primed. And as I would put it, this article could loom large in the history of American politics if there are significant fights in 2024 over whether Trump can be on the ballot at all. Stay tuned.
So Pete Atkinson is in the chat this morning, and he has a question for us. He says, is there any hope that we won't be facing a geriatric boxing match again in 2024? It just seems like all the forces are putting Trump and Biden against each other.
Well, it does. It's not for any lack of trying on our part to let people know about Vivek Ramaswamy. There are alternatives out there. Mike, I mean, is there any hope? No. I mean, there isn't, Pete. I mean, institutional inertia has gravitated around these two. And I don't think anybody's going to break a party mold. The Democrats figure all they got to do is run against Trump and keep Biden from doing a header into a toilet. And there's the 2024 election, and the forces that are satisfied with that will have another 4 years. I mean, the only real hope is that one of these guys slips on a banana peel or chokes on dinner, and that comes close to wishing for violence, which we're not doing. So there are other candidates out there. If you're on the left, Mike keeps talking about Gavin Newsom in California. If you're on the right, Vivek Ramaswamy is a powerful candidate. Mike will talk in a moment right now about his appearance on Candace Owens podcast recently, where he was masterful once again. And so, what's it going to take for somebody like Ramaswamy to emerge? I think we've got I don't know. I mean, if I were
just to honor Pete's question in another, it does seem to me as though establishment politics favoring the Democrat Party are in a wild game of chicken with one Donald Trump right now. If you zoom out, if one is to zoom out as far as possible to still get a sense of the political picture in the United States, we have a president, a commander in chief, presiding over really tenuous and escalating geopolitical tensions and a declining sense of domestic morale, with increasing transparency into sort of the dubious and corrupt nature of his ascension to power and what he's doing in certain areas of the world right now. And it appeared, and I think that the most recent thing is the appointment, DOJ's appointment of one Weiss to be the special prosecutor, or and I could be in the case involving Hunter, which appears to be, again, dubious at best. But aside from that, if we were to take sort of the obvious illegitimate nature of the current administration in practice, I don't want to go all the way back to the election. Certainly we can, and we have. But in practice, the illegitimate nature of this administration against what seems to be all forces available, all resources available being deployed to subvert Trump's ascension to the White House for a second term, it does seem to be a game of chicken to me, Pete.
Well, let's pivot, even though it's not on the screen. Consider the drama taking place now in Judge Chutkan's courtroom, and that's the courtroom in D.C. where where Trump is facing J6 related charges. On Friday, she didn't issue a gag order barring Donald Trump from speaking about the case, but what she did was issue a set of orders restricting what he can say about the evidence that he's been shown. And so, the government proposed that somebody sit with him while he reads through documents, and so-called babysitting him. And the judge said, no, he can read them, but he can't take a video or a recording device in with him when the former president can, when he reads them. And he can take notes, but he's got to show his notes to his lawyers before he leaves. And they can't let him leave with notes that contain damaging information that he could use, presumably to retaliate against somebody. And I thought, my goodness, how insulting is that? In handling cases involving drug dealers, for example, the courts often issue orders that you can't show. You can't give documents relating the identity of confidential informants to your client for fear that those documents will circulate and ill will come to the informants. But you can talk to your client about the defense. Now, what the judge has said here is she's going to do everything within her power to assure a fair trial. And that means that if Trump violates her orders, he faces potential incarceration. And so, once again, I'm marveling at the Trump's defense team's passivity and lack of creativity as they defend him. Here's how he should manage this problem. He should tell his lawyers, I don't want to read any of that crap. You defend me. No,
he probably already has.
No, I don't want to read any of that stuff. I'm reading the newspapers, and I'm going to discuss what is a matter of public concern in a public domain. And I'm going to comment as I see fit about the case that the Justice Department leaks to the press or that is reported on in the press. And I think this is a political prosecution, and I intend to run on the basis that that this administration is trying to silence me in the criminal courts. And that sidesteps Judge Chutkan's concern, because if he never looks at the documents, he can't obviously be accused of disclosing their contents. If he says to his lawyer, I don't want to discuss what's in the documents until the time of trial, we have a different issue. The judge can say you could only have known that from your lawyer, and she then seeks to hold him in contempt. The lawyer has to become a witness saying, I didn't tell it to the government, but that violates or could potentially require a waiver of the attorney-client privilege, and things begin to get very complicated. But I get the sense that Team Trump in the executive suite of his legal defense is disorganized and on the run and still don't know what they're going to do. I mean, I get intimations of various theories that they're going to pursue, and that's fine. They should put it into motion practice, but the stop and start again character of their public comments on behalf of the president are unpersuasive. And the notion that they're somehow going to seek a lot of additional time to perfect this trial, it may be understandable in terms of the paint by numbers lawyering that you expect from run-of-the-mill cases. I mean, after all, there are 11.3 million documents that Jack Smith is going to turn over to Team Trump.
That is
how are they going to read those?
That is an unbelievable number of
yeah.
documents.
How are they going to read them between now and January of 2024 or even January of 2025? And the answer is they're not going to get them all. They're sipping from a fire hose. It's the government that's going to have to choose its case. It's the government that's going to have to choose its election, or its witnesses, rather, elect its witnesses. We all know, for the most part, who those witnesses are and who what they're going to say, because they've been widely reported upon in the press. So Donald should say to his lawyers, lock me out. I don't need a SCIF, that is a secure compartmentalized room at Mar-a-Lago or anywhere else for me to review these documents, because I don't want to hear them.
Right. Well, I mean, there's 3 million per month between now and the start of the set trial date, right? We've got 4 months left in the year, 11.3 million documents. There's no way. There's no way to get through all of that.
He should let his lawyers defend, concentrate on running, and be ready for the fight in the Secretary of State's offices. And then when Judge Chutkan tries to incarcerate him or impose further sanctions for violating a rule, say, what rule did I violate, Judge? I haven't been paying any attention to this. I'm too busy running for president. Game on, So.
BTL says, so a person would not be allowed to discuss materials in public that are being used to prosecute them in public. It's exactly the paradigm that I think.
Yeah, and in part, from Judge Chutkan's concern, and it's not an illegitimate concern on his part. Trump is basically out there saying, I'm going to get even with you if you're coming after me. And could that chill a witness? Could that make a witness afraid to come forward? Possibly. Could that be construed as witness tampering? Not in and of itself, but it becomes close to that line. And so it is not uncommon for judges to say that in order to protect the integrity of the pretrial proceedings and the trial itself, parties are barred from discussing certain things, and the government typically withholds the identity of cooperating witnesses until shortly before trial. These are common moves in a criminal case, but what we have is an uncommon criminal case. We have a criminal case against a man who's running for president under extraordinary circumstances. If he's committed a crime, well, then he'll be held accountable for it if a jury so finds. But how does the judge manage the need for integrity in her courtroom in the criminal justice process, and solicitude for witnesses against the public's expectation that our right to vote for the candidate of our choice should not be impinged, and that candidate, if he feels he's being targeted by a Justice Department on a political toot, has the right to call its bluff. These issues take us to the very frontier and limits of established law, and will raise profound questions about the legitimacy of the institutions, the criminal justice system, the electoral process itself, thus fulfilling the promise Mike and I made to you at the beginning of the year to follow this election in all of its wild consequences throughout 2023 and 24, because it's going to get a lot crazier.
Right. And particularly because a lot of these legal issues are cases of first impressions for the general public, even practicing attorneys. Right. So be very careful with your sourcing. Not that I personally am the most credible of sources, but I think that Norm and I do approach these issues quite carefully and attempt to absorb the issues of law prior to giving you an opinion on where things are going. Everybody has their biases, but the issue with these sorts of things in the press is that journalists and those reporting on it historically are civilians. They are not practitioners of law, and they're going to be structured in a way that are designed to gain clicks, to sell ads, etc. And so there's a lot lost on the public in and among these things. So when Norm is talking about sort of a paint by numbers legal approach, his sense of what a legal team on behalf of Trump should be doing, that is informed by a lifetime of practice at a very high level. And what I find really beneficial and productive for anyone, including myself, is to be able to come here and to think through these issues in a really patient and sort of neutral way. Because like I said at the start of this mini rant here, these are all issues of first impression in 2023 in terms of the public consciousness. There isn't, and that's I think that's my issue with the courts, Norm, in particular. Yeah. Now,
no, I hear you. And
being made whole is at best a delayed.
And questions will arise for many, many years to come about the timing of this prosecution and whether it really needed to run in 2024, just as the election season came again. It's just simply too coincidental for words. Justin Carter offers prayers for the folks in Hawaii, as do we. 90-some people dead, the deadliest wildfire in American history. And he raises the question, wouldn't this be a good opportunity for a candidate to break off and make some positive headlines? Or how about the president? At least announce a visit, my God. Good point, Justin. Let's see if anybody gets out there and brings goodwill to the people of Hawaii. We haven't covered the fire in general.
I don't really know what to cover about it, so I don't have very much to add at this point, Norm. So I apologize for anybody expecting us to. It's just very difficult to get any comprehensive information on that stuff right now.
Well, do expect the following, though. Do expect the public health state to announce that we need better coordination of state and local resources, better warning, more drills for people, better ways to make sure that people comply when somebody pulls the warning trigger, so that this will never happen again. Because as Rahm Emanuel once said, never let a crisis go to waste. In terms of the public health state, if somebody skins their knees or gets hurt, you can always enact a regulation requiring rubberized sidewalks. That might
Ball and Legitimacy, our inaugural fantasy football season. If you're interested, please send an email to pattispodcast@gmail.com. We do have several emails pending in our inbox with people exclaiming interest. We are trying to gauge an accurate total of people who will join us this season. We will be doing one. This isn't speculative or tentative. We will be having a fantasy football season here with Ball and Legitimacy. And you can always find us on Rumble Video, YouTube Live, and X Live, Periscope, whatever they're calling it these days, 8 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. If you're unable to join us live, catch us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, etc. If you're there, leave us 5 stars or leave us alone. Please also consider giving us a like or a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed. Norm, I think we'll get to the Vivek on Candace Owens podcast tomorrow. There are several things that I want to point out from that video, but I'm also just going to tell everybody now that he's published 3 books in 18 months, and I think that you and I should both, Norm, consider trying to consume those before going too deep on Vivek moving forward. And so that's, I'm going to buy the first one today and try to start getting through that.
All right. I'll add it to my list.
Anyway, thank you all for being here on this Monday. Norm, I know your vacation is coming to an end, but enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, I am. Boy, I'll tell you, the downside of a long vacation is the last few days. It's like, oh my God, I got to go back.
All right. Well, we'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Ciao.
Bye.